Blood dripped onto the checkerboard linoleum, staining the dusting of powdered sugar. He was the deadliest man in New York, cornered, bleeding out, and cursing his enemies in the mother tongue of kings. He expected to die. He didn't expect the plump baker to sigh, answer in perfect Greek, and hand him a cupcake. The rain in Astoria, Queens, didn't wash away the sins of the city. It only made the streets slicker for the rats. Josephine Mercer stood behind the counter of the Golden Crumb, humming softly to the crackle of the ancient radiator. At 28, Josie was a woman made of soft curves and quiet resilience. She was unapologetically plush, her body a testament to a life spent perfecting the art of butter, sugar, and survival. While the fashion magazines demanded sharp angles and starvation, Josie possessed the kind of lush, Renaissance beauty that filled a room, anchored by eyes the color of a bruised skyline. Her bakery was her sanctuary. It smelled of vanilla bean, toasted almonds, and the lingering scent of espresso. She had built it from nothing after her Greek immigrant grandmother passed away, leaving her a heavily mortgaged building and a brain full of old-world recipes and harsh street truths. It was 2 a.m. on a Tuesday. The neighborhood was dead. Josie was busy frosting a batch of dark chocolate cupcakes when the front door imploded. The bell above the frame didn't just ring, it shrieked as the heavy oak was kicked open, splintering against the wall. A man stumbled inside. He was a towering mass of broad shoulders, drenched in rain and blood. He wore a bespoke charcoal suit that likely cost more than Josie's ovens, but the fabric was torn at the shoulder, a dark, wet stain spreading rapidly down his left side. Damien Argyros leaned against the pastry case, his breath coming in ragged, violent hitches. He was the reigning boss of the Argyros crime family, a syndicate that held a chokehold over the ports of New York and New Jersey. He was a man who traded in fear, steel, and silence. But tonight, the Sokolov Bratva had laid a trap. His driver was dead. His gun was empty. He had dragged himself 3 blocks through an alleyway, seeking a dark corner to either make a final stand or bleed out in peace. Instead, he found pastel pink walls and the overwhelming scent of buttercream. He gripped the edge of the glass display, his knuckles white, blood pooling at his designer shoes. He looked at the woman behind the counter. She was wearing a flour-dusted apron over a simple black dress that hugged her generous hips and full chest. She held a piping bag suspended in midair. She didn't scream. She didn't dive for the telephone. She just stared at him with an infuriatingly calm expression. Damien clenched his jaw against a wave of agonizing pain. The Russians would be here in seconds. He was a dead man, cornered in a dollhouse. Gamoto, he hissed, the harsh, guttural Greek syllables tearing from his throat. Thatus faxoolus, putanas ye. Damn it, I'll slaughter them all, sons of bitches. He closed his eyes, bracing for the inevitable sound of boots on the pavement outside. He expected the fat, innocent baker to cower, to beg for her life in a panicked, high-pitched American squeal. Instead, a soft thud echoed on the glass counter. Damien snapped his eyes open. Josie stood right in front of him. She had set down the piping bag and was currently holding a red velvet cupcake with thick cream cheese frosting. An prokite na pethanis, tulahiston phai ligi zakari, yatosok, Josie said. Her Greek was flawless, carrying the distinct heavy cadence of the Peloponnese, her grandmother's dialect. If you're going to die, at least eat some sugar for the shock. Damien froze. The sheer absurdity of the situation momentarily overrode the agony in his shoulder. You speak Greek? He rasped, his voice a low, gravelly baritone. I speak a lot of things, Josie replied smoothly. Right now, I'm speaking common sense. You're bleeding on my clean floor. She glanced toward the shattered door, catching the distant, rhythmic sweep of headlights cutting through the rain. The Sokolovs. "Get behind the counter," she ordered, her voice stripping away any illusion of a soft, helpless baker. It was the voice of a woman who knew exactly how the underworld operated. "They will kill you," Damien ground out, clutching his shoulder. "They'll buy a macaron and leave," Josie shot back. "Move, now." With a surprising display of physical strength, Josie grabbed his uninjured arm and hauled his massive muscular frame behind the display case. She shoved him down into the cramped space between the industrial refrigerators and the flour bins. "Keep quiet," she whispered, tossing a heavy flour sack towel over his bleeding shoulder to stem the flow. Damien crouched in the dark, the scent of vanilla mixing with the metallic tang of his own blood. He watched her through a gap in the counters. Josie swiftly grabbed a mop from the corner and swiped it over the bloody footprints on the linoleum, tossing the mop head into a utility sink just as three massive men in leather jackets stepped through the broken doorway. They held suppressed pistols by their sides. "We are closed," Josie said in English, her tone instantly shifting to a polite, slightly bored customer service voice. She picked up her piping bag and casually resumed frosting the cupcakes. The lead Russian, a giant with a scarred jaw, sneered. "We are looking for a man. Tall, dark hair, bleeding." "A lot of men bleed in Queens," Josie said without looking up. "None of them are in my bakery. As you can see, there's nowhere to hide unless he fits in a bread oven." The Russians fanned out. One kicked open the door to the small restroom. Another peered over the counter, his eyes raking over Josie's plush, curvy figure with a disgusting, lingering sneer. He took a step toward her, reaching out a hand as if to grab her waist. From the shadows, Damien's hand tightened around the hilt of a backup combat knife strapped to his ankle. If the Russian touched her, Damien would gut him, exposed position or not. A fierce, completely irrational wave of protectiveness surged through his chest. But Josie didn't flinch. She simply leveled the metal tip of the piping bag directly at the Russian's eye. "I wouldn't," she said, her voice dropping an octave, cold and dead as a winter grave. "Health code violations, and I bite." The Russian paused, unnerved by the absolute lack of fear in her wide, bruised sky eyes. The lead man barked an order in Russian. "Leave her." He went down the alley. "Let's go." The men filed out, their heavy boots crunching on the glass. Josie waited exactly 60 seconds. She finished frosting the cupcake, set it on a pristine white plate, and walked around the counter. She looked down at the ruthless Mafia Boss, crouched among her flour bins. "They're gone," she said. She held out the plate. "Now, eat the cupcake. It has iron in it. Then I'm digging that bullet out of your shoulder before you bleed out on my supply of imported Dutch cocoa." Damien took the cupcake. He looked at the blood on his hands, then up at the magnificent, curvy woman standing over him like an avenging angel in a flowery apron. In that singular, bizarre moment, the ruthless head of the Argyros family realized two things. He was going to survive the night, and he was absolutely, terrifyingly obsessed. 4 days later, the underworld of New York was quietly bleeding. Damien Argyros did not take assassination attempts lightly. From his penthouse office overlooking the East River, he orchestrated a systematic, brutal purge of the Sokolov-Bratva's assets. Warehouses burned, lieutenants vanished. The message was clear: the Argyros king was alive, and his vengeance was absolute. But while his men waged war in the shadows, Damien's mind was anchored entirely to a tiny bakery in Astoria, Josephine Mercer. He had his top enforcer, Elias, pull every record on her. He expected ties to rival families, a hidden agenda, or a criminal record. He found nothing but tragedy and triumph. Orphaned at 6, raised by a fiercely traditional Greek grandmother, put herself through culinary school while working 3 jobs. She had no debts, no boyfriends, and no criminal ties. She was exactly what she appeared to be, a hard-working woman trying to survive. But Damien knew what he had seen in those eyes. He had seen steel. He had seen a woman who looked down the barrel of a Russian mafia threat and didn't blink. She possessed a quiet, deep resilience that fascinated him, and her body, soft, lush, carrying a quiet confidence that mocked the fragile, bony socialites he usually dealt with, haunted his dreams. On a rainy Thursday afternoon, Damien told his driver to take him to Queens. When the black armored SUV pulled up outside the Golden Crumb, the neighborhood seemed to hold its breath. Damien stepped out, flanked by two heavily armed guards. He was fully healed, save for a stiff shoulder, dressed in a sharp navy suit, looking every inch the terrifying apex predator of the city. The bell chimed. The new door, which Damien had secretly paid a contractor to install overnight, swung open. Josie was wiping down the counter. She wore a deep burgundy dress today, the fabric cinched at her waist, highlighting the dramatic flare of her hips and the generous swell of her breasts. She looked up, paused, and let out a long, exhausted sigh. "I don't serve mobsters on Thursdays," she said flatly, tossing the rag into the sink. Damien signaled his men to wait outside. He stepped up to the counter, his dark eyes locking onto hers. The sheer physical presence of the man was suffocating. He smelled of rain, expensive cologne, and danger. "I came to pay my bill," Damien said smoothly, his voice a dark caress. "The cupcake was on the house. The amateur surgery was a community service," Josie replied, crossing her arms over her chest. "Now, please leave before your scary friends outside scare off Mrs. Gable. She comes in for a lemon tart at 3. Damien smirked. It was a rare, dangerous expression that made the scar on his jaw stretch. "I want to buy the bakery's inventory for the day. All of it." Josie frowned. "Why?" "Because then you can flip the sign to close, and we can talk without Mrs. Gable interrupting." "I don't want to talk to you, Mr. whatever your name is. I stitched you up because I don't like dead bodies in my shop. That's the end of our transaction." "Damien," he said softly, leaning over the glass case, bringing his face more inches from hers. "My name is Damien Argyros." Josie's breath hitched slightly. Even in Astoria, the name Argyros commanded absolute terror. They were the ghosts of the harbor, the untouchable syndicate. She met his gaze, her posture unyielding. Before she could respond, the shop bell violently chimed again. 3 men walked in. They weren't Damien's men. They were wearing cheap suits, reeking of stale cigarette smoke and cheap liquor. Josie's expression instantly hardened. Damien noticed the shift. It was the Moretti crew, mid-level loan sharks and extortionists who had been plaguing the independent businesses in Queens. The leader, a wiry man with a rat-like face named Sal, slammed his hand on the counter, completely ignoring Damien, who was standing slightly to the side in the shadows of the pastry display. "Time's up, chubby," Sal sneered, eyeing Josie's body with a mix of disgust and lecherous intent. "Protection fee was due yesterday. 10 grand, or maybe we start breaking these nice new glass cases." Josie didn't flinch. She leaned forward. "I told you last week, Sal, I don't pay extortion. And if you call me chubby again, I'll take that rolling pin and show you exactly where the sun doesn't shine." Sal laughed, a nasty, grating sound. He reached over the counter, attempting to grab the collar of Josie's dress. "Listen here, you fat bitch." He never finished the sentence. Damien moved with the terrifying speed of a striking viper. He grabbed Sal by the back of the neck and slammed his face into the thick, reinforced glass of the pastry counter. The glass didn't break, but Sal's nose certainly did. A sickening crunch echoed through the bakery. The 2 other thugs reached for their weapons, but Damien had already drawn his customized 1911, pressing the smoking barrel directly against Sal's bleeding temple while leveling his cold, dead gaze at the other 2. "Drop them," Damien whispered. The tone was barely audible, yet it carried the weight of an executioner's blade. The thugs froze, recognizing the man holding the gun. The blood drained from their faces. "Mr. Argyros," one of them stammered, raising his hands. "We didn't know. This is Moretti territory." "There is no Moretti territory anymore," Damien said coldly. "This bakery is under my protection. If a single hair on Miss Mercer's head is harmed, if a single window is scratched, I will personally flay every member of your crew alive and hang you from the Brooklyn Bridge. Do you understand?" The thugs nodded frantically. Damien hauled Sal up by his ruined collar and threw him toward the door. "Run." They scrambled out of the bakery, leaving a trail of blood drops on the floor. Damien holstered his weapon, his chest heaving slightly, the adrenaline of violence singing in his veins. He turned slowly to look at Josie, expecting the inevitable. Women always looked at him with horror after they saw the monster beneath the suit. He braced himself for her screams, for her to tell him to get out. Josie stood perfectly still. She looked at the blood on the glass, then at Damien's knuckles. Slowly, she reached under the counter, pulled out a damp, warm rag, and handed it to him. "You got blood on the glass again," she said softly. Damien stared at the rag, then up at her face. There was no fear, only a deep, profound understanding. She saw the monster, and she was simply handing him a towel to wipe his paws. "You aren't afraid of me," Damien murmured, taking the rag, his fingers brushing against her soft, warm skin. A jolt of electricity shot up his arm at the contact. "I grew up around men who thought violence was the only language," Josie said, her voice steady, but laced with a quiet sadness. "You aren't the first gangster to bleed in my shop, Damien, but you're going to be the last. I don't need your protection." "You have it anyway," Damien stated, taking a step closer. The air between them grew thick, charged with a dark, undeniable gravity. "You saved my life, Mikrimu, my little one. I protect what is mine." "I am not yours," Josie fired back, her chin lifting defiantly. "I belong to myself." Damien reached out, gently tucking a stray curl of hair behind her ear, his thumb grazing her soft, full cheek. The contrast between his calloused, violent hands and her plush, delicate skin was intoxicating. "We will see about that," he whispered, his eyes dropping to her lips. "Pack a bag, Josephine. The Sokolovs know you helped me. You can't stay here tonight." "I have dough proofing," she protested. "I'll buy you a new bakery," Damien replied without missing a beat. "But right now, you are coming with me." The Argyros estate in Sands Point, Long Island, was a fortress masquerading as architectural brilliance. Surrounded by high stone walls, wrought iron gates, and a small army of men carrying automatic weapons beneath tailored coats, it was a place where power isolated itself. For 3 days, Josephine Mercer had been a prisoner in a gilded cage. But Josie was not the type of woman to sit by a window and pine. By the 4th morning, she had entirely taken over the estate's industrial-grade kitchen. The personal chef, a high-strung Frenchman named Claude, had tried to protest. Josie had simply handed him a perfectly laminated croissant, patted his cheek, and told him to take a vacation. Since then, the cold, sterile mansion had smelled of warm yeast, roasted garlic, and caramel. Damien stood in the doorway of the kitchen, loosening his silk tie, exhaustion lining his sharp features. He had spent the last 48 hours dismantling the Sokolov Bratva's shipping routes in Red Hook. He was running on espresso and pure, violent adrenaline. Yet, the moment he stepped into the kitchen and saw her, the noise in his head abruptly ceased. Josie was kneading bread dough on the marble island. She was wearing one of his white button-down shirts, the sleeve rolled up to her elbows, the hem barely reaching mid-thigh. It clung to the lush curve of her hips and the generous swell of her breasts with every rhythmic push of her hands. A smudge of flour dusted her cheek. She was the most breathtaking thing he had ever seen. In Damien's world, women were sharp, fragile things, socialites made of sharp collarbones, filler, and calculated smiles. They looked like they would break in his hands. Josie was different. She was a woman of substance, a living, breathing goddess of warmth and strength. He wanted to bury himself in her softness and never return to the cold reality of his empire. "You're staring, Argyros," Josie said, not looking up from the dough. "I am admiring," Damien corrected, walking slowly into the room. He stepped up behind her, the heat of his large frame wrapping around her like a blanket. He rested his hands on the thick, sturdy curve of her waist, his thumbs pressing gently into her soft flesh. He felt her breath hitch, but she didn't pull away. "You shouldn't be down here," she murmured, her hands slowing their kneading. "Elias said the Sokolovs hit a warehouse in Brooklyn last night." "Elias talks too much," Damien rumbled, pressing a soft, lingering kiss to the side of her neck. He inhaled the scent of her, vanilla, sweat, and something inherently Josie. "I handled it. Viktor Sokolov is getting desperate. He's running out of men, out of money, and out of places to hide." "Desperate men are the most dangerous," Josie said, turning around in his arms. She looked up at him, her dark, bruised sky eyes searching his face. "My grandmother used to say that a cornered rat will bite the cat." Damien smirked, his hand sliding up to cup her full cheeks. "I am not a cat, Nikrimu. I am a wolf. Let him bite." Before he could capture her lips, the lights in the kitchen violently flickered. Then, with a heavy mechanical thud that echoed through the estate, the power cut entirely. The sprawling kitchen was plunged into pitch blackness. Instantly, Damien's demeanor shifted from a lover to an apex predator. He shoved Josie hard against the floor behind the thick marble island. "Stay down," he hissed, pulling his custom 1911 from his shoulder holster in one fluid motion. A muffled explosion rocked the west wing of the house. The emergency backup generators didn't kick in, which meant the wiring had been professionally severed. "Breach!" Elias's voice roared from the hallway, followed immediately by the deafening crack of automatic gunfire. The Sokolovs hadn't run to hide. Viktor had sent a suicide squad directly to the Argyros stronghold. Damien crouched low, his eyes adjusting to the faint moonlight filtering through the skylights. He heard the kitchen service door, the one leading out to the herb gardens, creak open. Soft, tactical footsteps padded onto the tile. Two of them. Damien raised his weapon, but before he could fire, Josie moved. She hadn't stayed huddled on the floor. In the dark, she knew this kitchen better than anyone. She had memorized the placement of every tool, every ingredient. As the first assassin stepped past the stove, his night vision goggles glowing a faint, eerie green, Josie lunged from the shadows. She didn't scream. She didn't hesitate. She swung a massive 12-inch cast-iron skillet with the force of a professional baseball player. The heavy iron connected with the side of the assassin's head with a sickening, metallic clang. The man crumpled to the floor instantly, out cold before he even registered what hit him. The second assassin whipped around, raising his suppressed submachine gun. "Josie, get down," Damien roared, firing twice. The heavy .45 caliber rounds took the man in the chest, throwing him backward into the stainless steel refrigerators. He slid to the floor, dead. The kitchen fell deathly silent, save for the distant gunfire echoing in the main foyer. Damien rushed forward, grabbing Josie by the shoulders, his heart hammering against his ribs in a way that had nothing to do with combat and everything to do with terror. "Are you hit? Are you hurt?" he demanded, his hands frantically checking her plush body for blood. "I'm fine," she breathed heavily, still gripping the handle of the cast-iron skillet. She looked down at the unconscious man at her feet. "Grandma always said cast iron is an investment for a lifetime. I guess she was right." Damien stared at her, utterly stunned. She was wearing his shirt, covered in flour, holding a frying pan over a neutralized Spetsnaz-trained killer. A dark, possessive smirk slowly spread across his face. "Have I mentioned how terrifyingly magnificent you are?" Save the compliments, Argyros, Josie snapped, her survival instincts fully engaged. The West Wing is where the gas lines run. If they blew the manifold, and your men are shooting in the foyer. Damien's eyes widened. The realization hit him like a freight train. The whole house is a bomb. We need to leave, now. They didn't take the armored SUVs. Those would be tracked. Instead, Damien led Josie through a subterranean smuggler's tunnel that dated back to the Prohibition era, emerging in a heavily wooded ravine a mile from the estate. From there, they stole a rusted pickup truck from a sleeping landscaper's yard and drove into the city. By dawn, the Argyros estate was a smoldering crater on the Long Island coast. Viktor Sokolov thought he had won. He called a meeting of the 5 families at an abandoned sugar refinery in Red Hook, declaring the Argyros Empire dead and claiming the ports for the Russians. He was in the middle of his victory speech, surrounded by 30 heavily armed Bratva soldiers, when the heavy corrugated metal doors of the refinery shrieked open. Damien Argyros walked in. He was covered in ash and soot, his suit ruined, his gun drawn, but he wasn't alone. Walking perfectly in step behind him, carrying a pump-action tactical shotgun she had pulled from Damien's hidden armory, was Josephine Mercer. She wore combat boots, black jeans that hugged her curves, and a leather jacket. She looked like a Valkyrie stepping onto a battlefield. A pale, gaunt man with dead eyes laughed. "Damien, you survived, and you brought a baker to a gunfight? How poetic. Kill them." The Bratva soldiers raised their weapons. "Wait," Josie yelled, her voice echoing off the high tin ceiling. She racked the shotgun. The sound was sharp, universally recognized. "Victor, do you know what this building is?" Victor frowned, gesturing for his men to hold their fire for a second. "It is an abandoned sugar refinery, soon to be your tomb." "Wrong," Josie said, her lips curling into a wicked smile. "It's an active flour mill. Damien bought it through a shell company last year to launder cash." "And do you know what happens when you have a building completely coated in microscopic airborne flour particulates and someone introduces a spark?" Victor's face went pale. Every Russian thug in the room suddenly looked up at the rafters, where thick layers of fine white dust coated every surface. "Flour is highly combustible," Josie said cheerfully, her Greek accent bleeding through the English. "A dust explosion." She aimed the shotgun not at Victor, but straight up at the massive ventilation ducts above the Russians' heads. "Damien," Josie whispered, never taking her eyes off the ceiling. "Run." Damien didn't ask questions. He grabbed her hand, and they sprinted for the heavy steel door. "Shoot them!" Victor screamed, realizing the trap. But it was too late. Josie fired a single slug into the ventilation system. The impact shook the rafters, sending a massive, thick cloud of fine white flour cascading down over the Russians like a blizzard. At the exact same moment, Damien pulled a Zippo lighter from his pocket, sparked it, and tossed it blindly over his shoulder into the cloud of falling dust. He slammed the heavy steel door shut just as the spark ignited. The resulting explosion was catastrophic. It wasn't a fire. It was a concussive shockwave of expanding pressure and heat. The entire roof of the refinery blew skyward in a brilliant, terrifying pillar of orange flame. The ground shook violently, throwing both Damien and Josie onto the wet pavement outside. The heavy steel door buckled outward, glowing red-hot, but it held. Inside, the Sokolov Bratva ceased to exist. Josie lay on her back on the asphalt, staring up at the smoke billowing into the pale morning sky. She was covered in dirt, grease, and ash. She let out a long, shaky breath, her chest heaving. Damien crawled over to her. He hovered above her, his hands framing her face. He looked at the destruction behind him, then down at the plush, beautiful, lethal woman beneath him. "You blew up a warehouse with baking supplies," he whispered, his voice laced with absolute reverent awe. "I told you," Josie coughed, a tired smile touching her lips. "I know my ingredients." Damien didn't care about the burning building. He didn't care about the police sirens wailing in the distance. He lowered his head and kissed her. It wasn't a gentle kiss. It was a violent, desperate claiming, a clash of teeth and tongues, tasting of ash, adrenaline, and salvation. Josie wrapped her arms around his thick neck, pulling him closer, anchoring him to the earth. When he finally pulled back, he rested his forehead against hers, his breathing heavy. "The bakery is gone. The estate is gone," Damien said fiercely, his dark eyes locking onto hers. "But you are mine, Josephine. I will build you a fortress made of marble and steel. I will buy you 1,000 bakeries, but you are never leaving my side again. You are my queen." Josie reached up, wiping a smudge of soot from his scarred jaw. She looked at the deadliest man in New York, a man who swore in Greek and bled for her. "I prefer brick to marble," she whispered softly, "and I expect a commercial-grade proofing oven." Damien laughed, a rich, booming sound that echoed through the empty Brooklyn streets. He gathered her soft, generous body into his arms, lifting her effortlessly from the ground, carrying her away from the fire and into the dawn. The underworld would soon learn a new rule. You could cross the Argyros family and perhaps walk away with a broken leg. But if you walked into the Golden Crumb and disrespected the curvy woman behind the counter, you didn't walk out at all. Did this dark mafia romance leave you craving more high-stakes tension and unexpected twists? If you loved Josie's fierce hidden strength and Damien's ruthless, undeniable obsession, hit that like button right now. Don't forget to share this gripping story with your fellow dark romance readers. Drop a comment below telling us what your favorite scene was. And absolutely smash that subscribe button so you never miss another thrilling, gritty underworld tale. See you in the next video.